Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw this image, break it down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this and amaze yourself. Okay, so as explained in the intro, we're going to break this down into steps so that you learn not only about the painting process and techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, PROCREATE. But that isn't to say you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app PROCREATE, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And also in terms of the color profile, by default it's the sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1, but it is also here on the list. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using a combination of brushes, so within inking, the Studio Pen, within drawing, the Evolve brush, within artistic, the Leatherwood brush, within luminance, I might use the light pen, within airbrushing, the soft brush, probably the medium and the medium hard brush as well, and within organic, the rainforest brush. In terms of the colors, I've already pre-selected a color palette, but each of these colors, if you tap on one and go to the value section here, has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. Each of these codes is listed down in the video description, so you can copy them one at a time, paste them into this box, press enter, the colour will appear in this top circle, and then you can tap it together with all the other colours into a colour palette that you've created yourself. Or alternatively, next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download it for free to save you some time. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel and gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of most of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really does make a huge difference, so thank you so much. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my canvas to the portrait orientation. Then I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to use the first colour on the top row. I'm going to drag it from the colour circle at the top right into the canvas and it flood fills. Then I'm going to create a new layer. Click the plus symbol. We've created layer 2. I'm going to go back to the colours. I'm going to use the second colour on the top row. Go to my brushes. I'm going to use the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put it significantly up, about 70% size and 100% opacity. Then straight through the middle, I'm going to do a band of that colour. It just leaves a little bit of that blue at the top, which is perfect because then when we go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we slide this across, and we do it all the way to the end at 100% and then deselect. And it just creates a really nice gradient from that darker blue to a lighter blue, which is just what we need. It is on a separate layer, so if we need to adjust that, if we need to fine tune it, go to the N and turn the opacity down, then we can do that, which is why I use a separate layer. I'm going to go to my layers again and create a new layer, layer 3. And then I'm going to go to luminance, use the light pen. I'll go in with this warm colour. We might use the cool colour, but I'll go in with the 8th colour on the bottom row. Turn the size pretty low, and let's just double check this. Maybe not as low as that, maybe about 15%. 100% opacity. Tap on the layer and just clear that so we can start afresh. And then I'm going to pick a corner. I'm going to rest my palm on the screen. I always set in the preferences so that the only thing that makes gestures and marks rather is the Apple Pencil. So you should be able to rest your hand. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go to the wrench, preferences, gesture controls. And if you've got it so that it's enabled finger painting or painting with finger, you need to untoggle that. And that means that you will not be able to leave marks with your hand so easily. That way we can better place our hand, our palm on the screen while we add these dots for stars. If you don't do that and you try and do it by hovering, sometimes you end up with broader strokes that don't look quite as good. So I do recommend you have the stability, just placing your palm on the screen and you'll get a better result. Now these are quite warm, so we can go back in a minute and we can probably desaturate this. We didn't really need a lot of that colour, so I'll turn it down a little bit in a moment. We have it on a separate layer, so that's easy enough to do. We could, actually, as an alternative to that, press the N, scroll down, put it on Add, and that just makes them more dazzlingly white, which is pretty good for our purposes. That's maybe the better solution. You don't have them all packed together, you could have them spaced apart, it could be a slightly more sparse sky. There is a little bit of cloud and light in the sky still, so you're not necessarily going to see it as dazzling. You're not going to see as many stars as perhaps you would in a completely dark sky. So we're just doing a selection of these in this top corner. Once you feel you've done a good few, then you can go to the layers, slide, duplicate it, and then one of the versions you go to transform. I would flip it horizontally down here within freeform. Doesn't really matter which one you go to actually. And then flip it vertically, and then I'm going to move it to the other side. Zoom out just so you can take it right to the very edge. Deselect. Probably leaves a little bit of an awkward gap in the middle, so just go in and fill those in. Only takes a moment really. Add a few more. Then I'm going to take the top version of layer 3, tap on it, merge down so it joins those two layer 3s together, slide and duplicate it once more, top version, transform, flip it horizontally and vertically, and then do the same again, except I'm just going to bring it further down into this area. Now I don't need all of those stars by any means, I just wanted one or two more, so if you wanted to do some erasing at this point you can do. So we can go in with the eraser, set to the soft brush, 15% size, maybe 40% strength, and then I'm just going to go and subdue some of these in with that sky area a little bit, not too much, just somewhat, so that we have maybe about the top third with stars, and then they just start to fade out. You could always go back in just for one or two, perhaps just bright enough to remain through that, but not too many. So that does our stars. I'm just going to take the top version of layer 3 and just merge it down again, so now we have stars again on one layer. We just try to be as efficient as possible with the layers, so we've not got a vast amount of layers through the tutorial. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the third color on the top row. I'm going to go in with the artistic leatherwood brush. I've reset it so it is the default settings. I'm going to put it at the lower end of 2% size and maybe 90% strength. And we can do something of a horizon line about 2/3 of the way down, or a third of the way up, depending on how you look at it. If you struggle to get a horizontal line, just do it completely out. Second hand, put a finger down and it puts it perfectly vertical. It's a little bit further up from the third. I'm not too bothered about that, that's fine. Then we'll do tree trunks. Press lightly at the top, press more as you come further down. This is not the full shape of the tree, obviously. Doesn't really look particularly realistic, far too skinny, but it gives you a sense. You press lightly at the top, it gives you that sharper point. Press more as you come further down. And this will only really work for those distant trees. The ones closer to us, we're going to have a different technique. But for the ones that little bit further away, we don't need to be quite as detailed. And these ones at the edges are going to be obscured by bigger trees. And then these center ones, for the most part, is going to have a bit of a cabin obscuring it as well. We can always go in and fill any gaps as necessary. So I've done a selection. Let's pick one or two of the taller ones. And then I'm just going to kind of rock to left and right. Tap in. Leave some gaps if necessary. Bring it further down, just scribbling it in as it gets further down. They're all going to bunch together and you're not going to see that separation lower down anyway. Come further up. In fact, maybe at the top of this, I just need to add a bit more. I don't want it to look quite so sharp and pointy. Broaden it out a little bit, perhaps. Pick another one. Maybe there's just a sense of a tree trunk and then this type of shape, but you don't want to be quite as simplistic as that. You're just bearing that in mind so that when you are kind of pushing the texture, kind of rocking left to right, you kind of are creating those types of shapes. It's suggestive of it without being quite as simplistic. And then you can just scribble in for the bottom and it gives you a texture. If I zoom in, you can see it does have a texture, which, you know, is not going to be that noticeable, but it stops it being completely flat and it's quite useful actually. It's quite a useful brush and we are going to blur it out slightly and it's going to be subdued because it's the background compared to other details, but it's still useful to have that little bit of texture in there anyway. Okay, so left to right, leave some gaps, tap it in. It is pressure sensitive, so if you press really hard, you're going to get a much bigger shape. If you press lightly, you're going to get much smaller. So I would err on the side of pressing a little less. Leave some gaps. Again, much of this is going to be covered by our cabin in the scene anyway, but never mind. Let's just practice tree shapes. It's inevitable that when you're drawing trees like this with the textures, the shapes, are a little bit time consuming, but I'm trying to give you the method here that is less time consuming than it could be. We're just trying to create an efficient version, whittle it down to its essentials so we can convey the idea without spending an age creating every single minute detail. You still get the effect, especially when we are going to push it further back. So rock it left to right, and then pretty much just a scribble as it comes further down. We are going to add layers of snow texture to this in addition. So I recommend you don't get overly invested at this stage. You want to make sure that you're getting something of that shape looking nice, but it's not going to be as refined as a couple of the closer trees. So leave gaps, like I was saying, in places. The gaps are kind of what give it its character, really, I suppose. If it didn't have gaps, then it would just become a straightforward cone shape and pretty boring. It is the gaps that defines its shape in many ways. So build in the gaps. Tap it in. Scribble it in as it comes further down. Let's move over to these ones. And we are going to do a big tree here, but we're still going to get maybe one in that gap. We're still going to get a view of some of them. So at least give them a basic treatment. If it turns out that you end up seeing more of it, then you can always go back and refine if you feel it's still needed. And, well, you've not spent too long in it if you ended up obscuring it with another tree anyway. It's only taking a couple of moments just to build in a basic silhouette. Yeah. And I'm not going to do right at the very edge. I'm just going to fill in this part, and then it's just blocking it in. So I don't care about the detail there. We're really not going to see that. It's just the center area for the most part. Maybe the tree here towards this edge, but not those. So I'm just going to give this one a little bit of my time. Again, just build in those gaps, some of that character. Rock it left to right. And then just simply scribbling it in lower down. Maybe just one poking up there. Another one there, maybe just a little bit suggestive of another one back there. Okay, I'll do one here, but in more basic. And then as we come over here, well, I'm not going to take it too high, but this lower section certainly, I'm just going to block it in. I think it's going to be distracting to the eye if we don't have anything there. If we leave that blank, it's going to look pretty ugly for a while. So we'll just fill it in. Then I'm going to take that whole layer slide and duplicate it. The bottom one, I'm going to go to the transform. I'm going to flip it horizontally, go back to the layers, tap on the N, and just dial that opacity down to about 70%, and then go back to the transform. Now that we can see that it is paler, we can perhaps just play around with that. We have an obvious mirror image, so we want to distract from that. Just turn it down, maybe move it so it's not as obviously placed like that. That way we've just created an extra sense of layers of depth, some push further back, some further forward. It's worth doing that. I'm going to go to my top layer again, create a new layer, layer 6. Now before we add snow, I'm actually going to go to the fourth colour. I'm going to go back in with the leatherwood brush, and I'm going to turn the opacity of it down to 40%, but I'm going to keep the size, what we had before, 2%. Go for a couple of higher ones. And then, well, I'm just going to, in the middle of that tree, just scribble, bring that one slightly further forward, and just get a sense that it's not quite as pushed back. It is standing a bit further towards us. If you go over it a couple of times, it really will build in that dark colour. That's already brought it forward. Maybe there's another one there. I can just scribble in roughly that shape. It's more about depth creation than the actual texture of it. And then maybe one here. Again, it just scribbles get bigger as it goes further down to the ground. Much of this, again, is going to be covered over with other things. And definitely the snow texture, but still, we're just creating a greater depth. And you can see that really just creates a variation of distance for these trees now. Maybe another one there, and maybe another one. In fact, there's no point doing that. It's going to be obscured. Okay, so I'm going to go to the top layer, tap on it and merge down. Then I'm going to go to the bottom version of layer 4. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and zoom in so we can see. I'm going to blur that in about 2%. top version. I prefer to do it separately just in case it needs a different amount, Gaussian blur. And yeah, I mean, even within the 2%, there is actually quite a bit of variation. So I don't want it quite as far as near the 3%. I want it just from the 1 tipped over into the 2%, and that's about right. And then I'm going to take the top version of layer 4, tap on it and merge down. So now all the trees are on one layer. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer. I'm going to tap on the new layer and put on the clipping mask, which creates a little arrow which points down to layer 4. And the reason it does that is that now it has an association. So anything I do on layer 5 is limited to the outlines of what I've already done on layer 4. So for example, if I went in with a wildly different color, and you can see it doesn't allow me to color in anything, even though it's on a separate layer, it is now bounded and restricted to the limits of what was on layer 4, which is really useful for what we're about to do. So we're not using the orange, we're going for the 5th color on the top row. I'm going in with the drawing evolve brush. I'm going to reset it, and you can see it appears slightly differently. I'm going to tap on it again, and I'm going to go to stroke path and spacing. I'm going to put the spacing up to about 50%. Click done. And you can see on the visualization over there, it's just a bit more broken, which is useful for the snow that we're about to add to these trees. So I'm going to have the brush size maybe about bottom end of 3%, and I'm going to put the strength of it about 80%, the opacity, and we'll start with something more prominent to begin with. So we'll go for one of the darker trees, and we'll zoom in a little bit, and you press lightly at the top part of these branches and just go left to right, and you're going to build in just some texture now that has kind of round shapes to it, which is going to be really useful for creating a sense of blobs and settled snow on these branches. So pick some larger blobs for the center, because branches project out towards us. You won't see the shapes of the branches. All you'll notice is the snow that is collected on it as it points towards you. So in the center you can do some random blobs, and then out at the edges perhaps just think about the shape of the branches as they project from left to right. So in the center, a few blobs, and then at the edges you can almost see a suggestion of the branches. So if we were to just pick an easy area down here where it's clearer, do some blobs. Branches are swinging outwards towards us and you don't see the shape of the branch. All you see is the collection of snow as round kind of blobs. But then as we get towards the edges, perhaps we see it run along the line of a branch. And it might be that, you know, they point downwards actually with gravity. But then rather than following that centre of a line, when we get closer to the centre, they're just going to be a little bit more random. And like I say, leave some spacing, so have some banding. That can work quite nicely. At the edges, maybe it collects into a downward stripe, so I'll show you again. So like this, and then in the centre it can be more of a collection of blobs, and then maybe even a big blob towards the centre like this. So it's this kind of an arrangement, but then you do that in segments. So I'll just delete it from there. That's not quite appropriate for there. So downward band of it, downward band of it, stripe of it, and then towards the centre it's going to be less coherent. It's going to be more like bigger blobs and shapes that just coalesce, bunch together like this. And we're going to treat the whole tree like that pretty much. And then press a bit more lightly as you go further up. Perhaps it's not going to sustain the larger clumps of snow. Perhaps near the bottom you can really allow it to build into larger clumps. You get bigger branches, can carry the weight. It gets further up to get a bit more narrow. And you know, it does a pretty good job at conveying that idea. And then at the bottom we're going to have it largely obscured, but it doesn't matter. Have a little bit of practice just imagining how it ties into the ground, the snow that's settled down there. And then really it's just repeat. So again, it's a little bit time consuming. If you do one or two of these, you can just swing from left to right, do more of that initially, and you can see that I'm generally putting in the sense of branches, keeping it a little bit random. And that does a good job too. Maybe it's better if you do it like this. Arguably it has something more natural for the benefit of not overly thinking it. Just dashes that, and then branches that point gradually more downwards the further we get towards the base. And then it ties into the ground. And then if you want to, we can go back in, just like I said. Maybe in some of these center areas we can add more disruptive blobs. Larger areas that really just collect that snow. And then up near the top, just scatter it in. It almost doesn't matter. You can see the impact of that. Much of this is still going to be obscured by the cabin again, so I wouldn't recommend you spending hours on this stage, or any stage really. We're trying to go for the most efficient version we can. I realise that something that I'm whizzing through quite quickly, when you're actually copying, might take you a few hours to do anyway. So an hour's worth of tutorial might take you 2 or 3 hours to replicate, or longer even. So I'm trying not to make the processes any more labour intensive than they need be. So we'll just get these prominent trees in to begin with, and then the ones behind that, well, I'm not going to be quite as worried about the detail on those. As long as you get some of the foreground ones looking right, then the rest will settle back there with a little less attention. But these are the important ones. And again, the base is probably going to be completely invisible to us because of another detail on top. We'll do it anyway. Okay, I'm going to speed up now. Be even looser. Just scribble this in. I think once you start to get the idea of it, you'll be a little less nervous, a little less worried that you're going to make a terrible mess. In some ways, the scribbling kind of works better. Gives it a more natural look in some ways. You can't go too far wrong, I think. Famous last words, really, but hey, we have the undo button. It's only Procreate, it's fine. There's a couple there that perhaps they just need a bit more attention as well. If it's a dark tree, if you've gone to the trouble of bringing it further forward, then you need to perhaps just spend a minute making it work in a way that you won't need to do with some of the more distant ones. So take a moment, make it work, and then we'll reconvene once we need to deal with the background ones. And then going to take the opacity of that to maybe 20%. And then for the background ones, I'm really not going to be as overly fussed about it. I'm just building in texture now. I'm really being a lot more rushed, a lot more rough with it. I definitely don't want to have an absence of texture of snow detail back there, but just to push them further backwards. We're having less of a stark difference between the dark and the light colours. That will just make them less kind of important in the scene. Perhaps I'll put up a little bit more from that actually, maybe the 40%, but still, it's significantly less contrasty than those two trees. So we get a sense that they are further back. And I'm just kind of keeping it as a combination between a scribble and a tap. So I am scribbling, but I'm at the same time introducing a kind of haphazard tapping, which might take a bit of practice, but it's a pretty rough, pretty sketchy kind of way of adding in texture. It's really not that thought over or considered, but it's enough to get a sense. And we do have the power of the eraser to go in and amend any of this that we think we get a bit too scruffy. But try to make it as efficient as we can. If I say the word efficient once more in this tutorial, then I don't know what I'm going to do. Edit it out, probably. I do find this in the editing process. I get a little bit hooked onto a particular word and I repeat myself, so I do my best not to. Sometimes I hear myself while I'm talking and realise that it might become a bit annoying to hear myself, or for other people to hear such repetition, so I can only apologise if that's what I do. In terms of those bits, they're going to be obscured, so I'll just do that to knock some of the darkness back. It's a bit scruffy, but there you go. Now with that whole layer, we don't want it to be overly sharp either, so we can go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and just blur in so we can really define, see how far we're blurring it. Again, probably to about the 2% is enough just to take away the sharpness of the edge of that texture. And it's a background detail anyway in our scene, so there, it's enough. Now if you want to go back at this point to layer 4, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. And we could stay with the 5th colour on the top row. soft brush with an airbrushing this time, 2% size, maybe 30% strength, and you think that any of these trees are just a little bit too dark in places, you can just go over them, knock some of the, what appears as some of the trees that are actually a little bit further back, or you want to make them feel like they're further back, you can just go over them, make that dark, or the darkness of the blue that we initially used a little less severe. It's a useful way of just, again, pushing them further away. I think that can be quite good. Okay, I think I've done enough fine-tuning on those trees for now. So we're going to go to our top layer again and create a new layer, layer 6. Probably the best thing to be adding at this stage is the cabin, and then everything else can build around that. So for that, we need a pretty bold structure. So I'm going to go to the 8th color on the top row. I'm going to go in with the medium brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 100% opacity, and just zoom out so we can figure out where we want the apex of this roof at the front to be. So I want it to be off center and almost at the top of the trees there, so maybe about here. And then I want the roof to come down to maybe here. Hold it until it snaps to a straight line. Hold it down here until it snaps to a straight line, and obviously you can adjust once it has snapped. Want it to be slightly raised compared to the point over here, but not too much. I don't necessarily want it to be shorter. Something like this. So you can see it's just a little bit higher than that one. That comes a little bit lower down, but really not by much. I'm just going to create a little sense of an end there. I'm going to do a line across, hold it till it snaps, and then again we can adjust it, fill it in. Again, do a line down, hold it till it snaps, then fill it in, like so. I'm going to do a little bit in from there, a line down. Doesn't need to be snapped to a straight line there or here. Then with that layer, I'm going to slide duplicate it, transform. I'm going to move it back here. Now you're not going to see much of it, but I'm just going to put it on uniform, pinching in from the corner just so it reduces in size a little bit. And I want to bring the top of it lower down by a little bit as well. Bring it to about here. Almost so you've got like a similar distance on this side between there and there. There's between there and there. But this peak is a little bit lower than that one. Maybe even a bit more. And then deselect. Then what we're going to do is, well, I'm just going to join that to here. Again, it doesn't need to be a straight line. Let's fill this in from that point to that point. Again, let's just fill it in. So now we've got a filled in roof on our structure. Some of these lines are surplus to requirements. So let's just take the layers, top version, tap on it and merge down. Go in with the eraser, set the eraser to soft brush with an airbrushing, that's fine. 2% size, 100% opacity. And let's just get rid of the superfluous details. We don't need them. Back to the brush, bring this line down. And to get the center perspective, this is probably going to be the longest of those sides. Then it's going to go to here. This one's going to come down a little bit more. And it's going to be almost horizontal, but just a hint of a slope up from there to there. It's not going to be that obvious, in fairness. But it just gives you a bit of a guide when we start adding kind of windows and other things. I'm actually going to fill this in. I'm going to turn the opacity of that down maybe to 90% or so. And then just with one scribble without releasing the pressure at all. It's important you don't do that, because if you lift it up and then do it again, it's no longer going to be at 90%. It'll be 90% plus another 90%. So it'll be almost full opacity at that point. It'll basically look like you've completely blacked it in. So I want to keep a little bit, just a hint of a difference between the absolute darkest version of it and then this, so you can still see kind of roughly the difference between the roof and other areas. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer on top of that, layer 7, and I'm going to go to my colors again. I am going to start adding some snow on top of the roof. And this will just be pretty forgiving. It will allow us to not worry as much about the wonkiness of things. So we'll go to the 5th color. We'll go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, low on that 2% size, and I'm actually going to put it to 100% opacity. And then, well, we can just do a line of it up here. And I wouldn't hold it till it snaps. We don't want it to be perfect. And then running across here, I almost want it to be a bit more wobbly. So I've introduced that element. And then down here, because of the slope, it probably would have a little less of a wobble, but still not a perfect line. And then we come to here, and remember this has the thickness, so it should have a thickness here as well. So just a little bit back from that line, we'll do another line that comes down here, and then we can fill this in. And you can see just how much of the background trees that this has now obscured. So I can only apologise if you spent too long and too much effort on those. I suppose the only consolation is that you've got a bit more practice at drawing trees, which is always useful, because if you're going to follow any more of my tutorials, then I will be doing more trees. That I can pretty much guarantee. So it's always good practice. I wouldn't ever see it as a wasted time. And then I'm going to turn that down to 1%, and well, maybe we can have a sense of it, pretty stylized sense of it, but we can have icicles, maybe. So rather than just having a flat edge, we'd introduce a sense that the snow has just been pouring over that edge, and we've even got icicles. Why not? It makes for a more interesting edge along there, I think. I don't really care to go along there and make them too glass looking. That's for another tutorial. I have actually done a tutorial on icicles in the past. Might be worth digging through. It was a couple of years ago though. One that I really enjoyed. But anyway, we're keeping it relatively simple for this video. It's only a small element. Then, well, we're going to have more features on the ground. We're going to have a collection of snow. So probably going to go still with a soft brush. Put it maybe at 3% size, and then I'm just going to build in the snow as it butts up against the back of that cabin, really. It's on a separate layer, so we can go back to the cabin, we can add details underneath this snow, so that's not an issue. So maybe turn it down a little bit actually, maybe put it at 2%. Have some blobs, maybe there's a bush or two. Turn it down a bit more to the 1%. In fact, maybe we should go back to the drawing evolve brush and just like some of the textures in the background. We can use that now to put it to 100% again. Maybe underneath some of the rounder shapes we're getting some variation in texture just down on the ground. Blend it in, tap in. Maybe there's some bushes where it just settles a little bit differently. Like this. So maybe over on this side we'll use the same brush to begin with, perhaps, just to create variation in texture, so it's not just an ugly end between the cabin and the ground. Makes it more interesting, perhaps. Then I go back to the airbrushing soft brush. Oops, that's quite small now, so back up to 3% maybe. Something like this. Might need to change that colour in a little while, but you know, we're building in a sense, and then it just swoops in here just underneath that line and maybe across. And that's the beginning of that transition. That's quite useful. So now we've started to reduce the amount of the actual cabin that is visible, so there's no point in adding details to areas that are going to be covered over. So we'll go back to layer 6, create a layer above that. I'm going to go, whoops, I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to go for the third colour. I'm going to go in with the medium hard brush within airbrushing. 2% size, 100% opacity. And well, we need to think about some windows. I suppose what we could do is just do an 4-sided shape, hold it. Hopefully it gives you a little arrow to tap on here, and we'll turn it to a rectangle. And then it still allows you the possibility of adjusting it with blue points. I'm going to reposition it over to here. I'm going to try and match that line a little bit. So this corner needs to come downwards. It's just going to be a little bit more pinched in at these corners compared to there. So it's just going to be a little bit taller here compared to it is there. And this line needs to run roughly parallel. I might pinch it in, make it a little bit narrower, and maybe just a little bit shorter. And then I can colour it in. I'm going to go to the eraser, put the eraser on the medium hard brush too. 1% size, 100% opacity. In fact, just for the center line, let's make it slightly bigger on that 1%. Go for the center if you can. Hold it. Then I can turn it down a bit smaller on that 1%. And then going to further subdivide, aim for the middle on both top and bottom and hold it, and you should be able to fine tune. Bit tricky to do, but spend a moment. Then I'm going to try and divide it into thirds roughly. So maybe just mark in initially where you think the thirds are going to be. And then start from here. Doesn't matter if it goes a bit wobbly, as long as you join with that dot. If you need to move the line to get it more exact, that's fine. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Not really, I'm saying that because it isn't perfect, but that's fine. Slide and duplicate it. Transform, and I'm going to move another one over to this side. I'm going to keep it on uniform, just make it a hint bigger, pull it from the corner. And that way we're going to get that sense of things, you know, getting bigger over at this side, just a hint. Take it closer to the corner. You can always just zoom out, check it, see how you feel it looks. Transform again. It's on freeform now, and maybe just stretch it that way. If you feel the shape is a little bit off, go to the other version. Transform, freeform, maybe push it this way a little bit. So you can fine tune them until you feel it looks about right. Again, zoom out just to check that. I'm going to take one of them, doesn't matter which, slide and duplicate it, and then zoom over to here, transform, move one of them. We're now going to do some side windows. So maybe in here, we are going to go on freeform, and we're just going to narrow it up. And then again, we've got this line, so that top line especially, I'm not too bothered about that because you won't see it, but certainly that top line needs to respect that angle a little bit. And zoom in if you need to. That one needs to come just a little bit lower down. So now that one I can slide and duplicate, transform, bring it further this way, go on uniform, make it a hint bigger. And we're really talking just small amounts of difference, but that's just going to increase the sense as it comes towards us that it's getting perspective. And then in that version, slide and duplicate it, transform and move it over here. Again, uniform, just make it a hint bigger, bigger again. And it's approximation at the kind of rules of perspective, really. It's not going to be absolute, but it's enough to get us there. And I might even go to freeform and just make it a little bit broader. Think about the gaps between the windows, try to make them roughly similar. And also think about these lines, try to get them best you can to line up. Again, if you need to just pinch that down, maybe pinch that up so it seems to run a little bit better and parallel for all of those lines. And it's not too bad, actually. What we could do with the eraser, I'm going to maybe go to all three of those thinner versions of layer 8 and just pinch them together. So they're all on one layer. I might go in with the eraser, medium hard brush, and there might just be a sense that they are indented a little bit, recessed, and therefore a bit less of this one is going to be as visible. If you need to do it until it snaps to a straight line, then you can do that. A bit less of that one is going to be visible. Hold it till it snaps, and a bit less of that one is going to be visible, and maybe they should get less visible as they go further back. So maybe that end piece of that window should be even narrower. A bit tricky to get that as a straight line, so zoom in if you need to, hold it. Another one there, hold it. I'm going to take all of those layer 8s, all three versions, pinch them together so now they're all on one layer. And zoom out. I might just go to the bottom edge of that with the eraser and just, I think it'd look better aesthetically if it was just a bit shortened. Doesn't matter if it's not an absolute match to the other windows. I think they look a bit tall. Shave off a bit there. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer above that, layer 9, but it's still underneath the snow. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to go to the second colour on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the medium brush with an airbrushing, 1% size, maybe 50% strength, and we'll zoom in. And then just on this side, there's going to be a section. I go over it a couple of times. Whoops. Perhaps we ought to put that layer underneath layer 8, might be useful. That way we can be a little bit looser when we go up to the very edge of it, not be so worried. And then same here, just to create another section, goes up to the very edge, that highlight. And this, again, it's just helping create the sense that it is recessed, indented back into that area. Maybe just a little bit at the top, because we are slightly low, looking up almost. And then on this one, we're going to have a little bit on this side. And then again, because we're looking up, we'll see the light reflect off the area above. And then off to this side again. Now underneath, I think if we have a ledge of the window, perhaps it should have snow collected on it. So we'll go in with well, maybe the 5th colour. And then we can have snow on here. So keep the same brush. Have a nice sort of settled area for snow underneath both. It's quite a nice idea. And I suppose we could do something over here too. Just tapping in a little bit. That adds to the aesthetic. I'm going to go back to layer 8, create a new layer above it, but tap on the new layer and put on clipping mask, which again links this layer to layer 8. I'm also going to change the blend mode of this new layer to add by tapping on the N and scrolling down, so it makes it an A. I'm going to go in with the 4th colour on the middle row. I'm going to go in with a soft brush with an airbrushing. 2% size, maybe 20% strength. And we're just going to use this now to ramp up that glow. Not in a completely even way. I'm happy for it to be a bit uneven. There's just going to be more light in some areas than others. Slightly randomly distributed. But there's lights that are higher up in the room. In some areas more than others. Make it uneven. It looks more naturalistic. Something like this. Create a new layer. I'm going to go to maybe the 10th colour on the top row. I'm going to go in with a medium hard brush. Top end of 2% size, 100% opacity. And I'm going to do a line down from the centre of that roof, straight down the middle, hold it till it snaps. That creates a nice beam that runs down here. Then back to layer 10 again, create a layer so that it goes underneath layer 11. I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to go to the 1st colour on the middle row. And still with the medium brush, I'm going to turn it down to 1% size, maybe 20% strength. And I'm just going to start running some beams that run across, just some lines. Try to keep them roughly parallel. Now, if you want to do the lines and then hold it till it snaps, then I think that's a fine thing to do. Not a problem at all. Try to keep them parallel to each other, and this is where you can start noticing the geometry being a little bit off in places, but don't worry. A good reason for perhaps not doing until it snaps to a straight line is that it preserves this more ramshackled look, and therefore maybe it's just a bit more forgiving of our imperfect geometry. It's perfectly imperfect, perhaps, is a way of looking at it. It's the way I'm going to explain it anyway. There you go. So you get some lines that cut across, and then some lines that cut across this way too. And I don't care if they don't match up completely. Just do some lines there. I'm going to broaden that up to the 2%, and then I'm just going to go over them again a little bit, make them a bit thicker towards the bottom. Perhaps the light is just reflecting back from the snow. We're going to do some light on the snow, and maybe it bounces back. Light does some strange things. So we're going to have the light from the windows that's going to impact on the snow, and then maybe in turn the snow is going to shine back its impact on the building. It has a sort of domino chain reaction where one thing affects the other, which then in turn affects another. So the snow is going to be highlighted, so therefore it's going to illuminate beams of wood as they get closer to the snow. I hope that makes sense. And then what we'll do with that bit where it merges together a little bit later. So you can see it's a little bit lighter there at the bottom. It just changes the dynamic a little bit. Turn it down again. Maybe there's a lot of light in this area, so this side of the cabin just a little bit more illuminated. In fact, we could go to a lighter colour. Maybe go to this colour, which is the 6th colour on the middle row. Turn it down perhaps though, 10% strength. And we can start to build in some of that. That's a slightly warmer hue. We don't want to overdo that. I think that's brought in a bit more light. I think that works. Go back to maybe the 10th colour. Maybe there's a pipe. Let's turn the opacity of that up, 60%. Maybe there's some kind of drain pipe. I don't know. I don't really feel like I need to get overly bogged down in the absolute architectural details. If you do, then please feel free to do that. That's not where I'm headed with the tutorial though. I am going to do a bit more of a sense of reflection of things. So with this colour still, so we're still, in fact, we'll go to the 1st colour on the middle row. 1% size, 60% strength. And we'll do a line up here. And we'll do a line down here. And that starts to pick up the light. Perhaps I'll turn it down on that opacity, 15%. And then I'm sketching in Again, some of that wonkiness is preferable. Create some different layers, different treatments, lines that cut through these different areas. And then maybe there's just like a bit that sticks out here so it interacts with the light differently from that window. Maybe you just got a sense the edge has got kind of round logs to it. And we could even go back to the cabin layer with that first colour, which was actually the 8th colour. Do we have the alpha lock on that layer? No, we don't. That's great. Put the opacity up to 100. You can still use this brush. And then we can just have a sense of logs making up that edge. I think that helps. Okay, I'm going to go back to the snow layer that's on top of our cabin. I need to add some of the highlights to the snow. It is going to be a super reflective surface. So we'll go in with a lighter colour. So we'll go for the 8th colour on the bottom row. We'll go in with a soft brush with an airbrushing. 2% size, 15% strength. And just like we've got light from the windows, light on the ground, it's going to impact the edge of that snow. Maybe I'll turn down even more, 1%. Maybe we could even go to the layer 7 and put on the alpha lock. That way we can be a little bit more haphazard. Don't need to be as neat on that edge. That works. Saves us a little bit of energy trying to be overly neat. And then maybe these icicles can just, especially when they're nearer windows, can just reflect some of that light a little bit better. I'm also going to go perhaps to the lightest blue, the 2nd colour on the top row. And well, think about the light in the sky. We have stars, we have variation in blue and light. So maybe the top can just reflect some of that lightest blue. Just create some texture up there. It doesn't need to be much. Maybe a band that runs parallel with the roof line. 2% down here along this edge. We could even go darker, I suppose. We could go to the 7th colour. 3% size, 15% strength. And there's nothing wrong with having some darker tones in there too. We probably need a chimney for this building. I'm just looking at it now. It looks strange. So we'll have a chimney in here. So for that, we'll go back to layer 6. We'll go in with the medium hard brush with an airbrushing. We've got the 8th colour, but we'll go for the 9th colour. It's just a hint lighter, which I think will be good. 2% size, 100% opacity. And well, I'm going to do a line, hold it till it snaps, maybe make it a bit shorter. Initially, I'm just going to do it across, hold it till it snaps, and then bring it down, hold it till it snaps. Just fill that in, like so. Any little anomalies, just get rid of. I'm just going to have it, and I'm just going to have it coming up to a point here and here. Maybe not too sharp. We don't want that angle to be too much. Square that off a little bit, that works better. And this side, maybe it should catch the light a bit more. So I'm actually going to put the layer on alpha lock, just to make it a bit easier. Go back to the 7th colour. Same brush, same settings, but this side, just lighten it up a bit, like so. Line at the top, line at the edge. Just graze it ever so slightly on this side. I want this side to be definitely lighter, but just not quite fully dark on that side. Something like this. Little line at the top there. Maybe another line that runs with it as well. Okay, that's definitely helped. Go to that layer, turn off the alpha lock, and maybe we should put a little bit of a sense of smoke. So 2nd colour on the top row, soft brush with an airbrushing, 3% size, 15% strength, and just, I don't know, just a little bit of a hint of smoke up here. Maybe it could even appear darker. Smoke isn't necessarily going to be lighter, especially when it goes up into the lighter areas of the sky combination. I'm going to add 2 major trees here now, and then some reflections in the snow. So let's get on with the major trees. So go up to the top and create a layer above that, layer 13. And we're going to go for a pretty dark colour. So we'll go for the 8th colour on the top row. We'll go in with the organic. We'll go in with the inking studio pen. 20% size, 100% opacity. And let's just get our tree in here. So all the way up from here, all the way down here. Hold it till it snaps, why not? You're not going to see it anyway, but it's just going to give us the sense of where to put it. And then I'm going to have a major tree up here as well, maybe even taller, but maybe it's just set back a little bit more. So about here. Then I'm going to go to organic, rainforest brush, the default settings on the rainforest brush, 2% size, 100% opacity. And then I'm just going to go from left to right. Should be a relatively familiar process by now, but it's just a little bit more articulated than the trees in the background. This brush is just a little bit more useful, slightly less jaggedy and random, a little softer. So we probably won't need to add any Gaussian blur to this. But we're just swinging out, tapping, rocking left to right. We might just see a little bit hint of that tree trunk coming through. And then as we come further down, the branches are going to start to point more downwards. Gravity, snow is just pushing these more and more downward. And again, apologies, we are covering up more and more of the trees that you might have invested a little bit of time and be quite pleased with them, but this is the way it goes with art. Sometimes in order to create an overall effect, you end up having to cover up something that was maybe working quite nicely. I wouldn't resist that necessarily, although we do have the option of slightly moving it. Maybe we'll push it that way a little bit so it goes off the edge of the canvas, and it's certainly now starting to collide with the edge of that cabin, so that might be quite useful just to nudge it to the right slightly. We can do that, it's on a separate layer. One of the just massive advantages of digital is that you do things on different layers and you can treat them as completely different elements, and you can endlessly fine-tune, move them around, and really kind of edit the image in a really super useful way. So we'll go to the selection, freehand, just grab it, close the loop, transform, and I am going to just move it this way, just so it goes a little bit more off the edge. That's great. And then we'll come to this one. Same process. Rock left to right. We are going to, in these cases, pretty much obscure that tree trunk. Don't really want it to show through. But there's a sense of it being there, even if you don't directly see it. Even if the density of everything on top is so much, you don't see it, then somehow it kind of shows through. It informs everything that you add on top, therefore its impact is still felt. So it's important that we have it there. Again, let's just move this all the way down. Again, it might be getting a bit close to that cabin, so easy enough to shift. Just scribbling, thinking about the edges more than I am the center. Obviously the center is going to have mainly just a silhouette, and then the snow is going to be what defines those shapes. So I can even just scribble in really quite roughly, sketchily for that center area. And then the bottom is going to be blended in with the ground as well, so I don't need to worry about that. Again, I'm going to go to the selection, freehand, draw around it, close the loop, transform, and again I'm just going to nudge it that way just a bit. I think they work better. Tap on that layer, put on the alpha lock, go in with the drawing evolve brush, go in with the snow color we were using before. So we were using the 5th color, maybe we're using the other color. Either way, the 5th color is good for this. We'll go in with maybe 2% size, 100% opacity. We are going to aim for the top edges of many of these branches, but it doesn't have to be completely consistent. You can treat this a little bit more sensitively, a bit more delicately than other areas. Now, when I come to do the center areas here, to portray branches that project outwards towards us, I'm going to have the snow settled in a kind of upside down shape like this. So generally like that kind of a shape, where you've got more of a distinct shape at the top, but then as it comes to the bottom part of it, it just fragments more and more. And that can be a really good way of conveying snow that's settled on branches that are projecting towards you. Now you don't have to pack this in as much as we did the background. Perhaps this could be a little bit more sparse with the snow. It's okay to treat it a little bit differently. Find the balance of snow that you think works well. I might just turn this up a little bit from 2 to 3%. Let's just start working in here a little bit more. Again, stick with the general shape until we get to some of the outer branches. Then maybe it can follow that line of the branch. And then in the center you get more of that hump kind of shape. And they will get smaller as you go further up too. And it's quite a nice way of getting that idea across. It kind of works. Just tap it in quite loosely towards the top. And then just scattering as we come further down. Just add some random touches in the mix. Further down here. Like this. And then we're just going to move over to the street. Look how nice that now looks compared to the other trees. A bit more of a sparse treatment. It really benefits from it. We want to preserve and protect some of that really dark tone. I think the only way we're going to do that is just to add less of that texture. So again, some of those hump shapes is a really good kind of shorthand for building in this kind of look. Tend to get flattened out curves on the top and then it fragments underneath. Less so at the edges like I've explained, but okay, I'm just going to whiz through this now so that we can get to the next element. Turn it up, 4% size near the bottom. We can just add some more random blobs and shapes that just blend that in quite nicely. Same over at this side, and I really think that's quite effective. If I do say so myself, I like that effect. Okay, I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and zoom in so you can see its impact. Just blur it in, maybe to 2%, deselect, and that's just softened it in. So they look really nice in terms of the placement compared to everything else. It really has brought it together quite nicely. Now we're going to start adding some of the reflections in the snow. I'm going to be quite dramatic about it. So I'm going to go to the top layer and create a new layer, layer 14. I'm going to go in with some of these colors. So I'm going to go to the first color on the bottom row. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, 10% size, 100% opacity, and well, it's quite a dark blue, and I feel like we need to have that as a, just set it in there initially, and then just press lightly as it comes further up. I think we need that dark blue as a contrast to the light colors that we're likely to add on top. So just very gently nudge it up towards that top area. We don't want to see much of that dark blue appear as a haze or anything like that. And that's really reset that blue for us. I'm going to go in with the next blue, the second color, turn it down, 3% size, 100% opacity, and then we can start to use this now to add some textures back here. So where are we? 2% size, 100% opacity, and we can just use this to create some lumps, some bumps in that snow, some irregularity, some texture. People are going to have to be able to come and go. Animals are going to tread through here. We're going to do a bit of an impression through the snow. Maybe just put that back up again, 3%, maybe near the base of the tree. Get a bit more of a shadow area back here. Combinations of tones is useful. Maybe in the background here, so where was that? That was probably layer 7. Go back here. Maybe turn it down from 100% and just lightly graze in that background. I want a bit more of a blue back there. That sets it further back. Where were we? Top layer, layer 14. And we can go for the next colour. We'll go for the third colour on the bottom row. Still with the soft brush with an airbrushing. Turn it down, 2% size, maybe 80% strength. And again, subtly bring in some shapes, some texture, and it may be we go over this with even lighter colours, but tap in some variation. Not only is the sky emitting light still, but then we're going to, as previously said, going to have a lot of light being emitted from the, well, we can see it from the windows. And snow is so incredibly reflective, sometimes even just subtle lights, especially if you imagine it like a long exposure photograph, even, is really going to be quite dramatic in terms of some of the colours you can pull through the scene. Okay, not too much of that. I'm going to go to the fourth colour on the bottom row. Maybe 3% size, 60% strength. And then we're starting to really pull in some warmer colours now. Maybe just at this edge. We're just starting to get like at the peripheral. Still the remnants of the light that's going to be coming through here in a moment, but we'll start off with the subtlety of it at the edges. So maybe 2%. Maybe it's just picking up on the edges of things. And we're just slowly going to ramp up the impact of the light. I think it's better to set the stage and do it more gradually. Because if you went in there straight with the brightest colour, it's just going to like really over the top. But if you set the stage, then it works better. 4% size, maybe just mush in an area here that's really starting to be impacted by the light that we're about to add. And then turn it down, even less than 30%, just bring it down here. Maybe there's a dark area through the center there that is less impacted by the lights, or churned up even. Okay, let's go for the next color, the fifth color. 2% size, 30% strength, and this is where we're going to start defining some of these shapes now. So we're going to have more lumps that stick up, that continue to bounce the light from the windows. Maybe turn this down for a bit more definition, low on that 2%. Again, more lumps. More textures. Maybe in the center here, there's still, going to be areas that really reflect that back. Even when you've got almost like shadow bits, there's going to be bits that will stick up and reflect that light. I feel like I just need to be bolder now. So let's go forward to couples. Let's go to the seventh color. And tentatively, I'm just going to start adding in some of the impact of the cabin light on this bit of snow. So not quite all the way up to the very edge. There might just be bits up here that are sticking up that catch the light as well. But for the most part, the windows don't start down here. So therefore the light will be a little bit set back as well. Now if the window started down here, then this bit of snow that immediately touches the hut would be incredibly impacted by it too. But we're going to set it a little bit further back before it really starts to ramp up. And again, the more gradually you add this in, the more varied you are with this, the better. Keep zooming out, checking. Is it working? I feel that it is. Hopefully you feel that about it too. Now, when you are following along, this is one of those areas where it's going to take a moment to really see that it is pulling together. Don't be disheartened if it doesn't look instantly like I'm showing you. You're going to have to just bear with it. Stick with it. Maybe turn that up. 3% size and press lightly as we come further away, allowing this light to gradually start to blend in as it comes further away. Press lightly, and then as it gets closer to, you can allow it to build up and press on a bit more. So it's fiercer, stronger as it gets closer, and then as it gets further away, you can turn the size of it up and turn the opacity down. Press even more lightly. I'm really hardly touching the pencil to the iPad screen when it gets further away. I'm literally just grazing that surface, and you can see the impact that's having already. Let's go for it. Let's go for that last color, the eighth color on the bottom row. 2% size, really low, maybe 30% strength, and this is going to be what kind of sets the standard for that glow. In fact, I even go lower on the 1%. This is the super bright reflection. This is the brightest bit. So everything else is going to be less than this. So add some of that, zoom out, check how it looks. It looks nice, I think. We can bring it this way a little bit. If you've already determined that it's got a lot of light in an area, then you can add a few bumps, a few extra bits of this super bright colour as well. Be careful not to overdo it with this colour. Would be easy to do. So I think that's probably enough of that lightest colour. So I'm going to immediately jump back again a colour, turn it up a size, 3%, and then start to bring it this way. Blend it through. We've got the lightest point. It's serving well, but we don't want it uniformly that bright colour. We want the other colours to really be there for the most part. Zoom out, check it. Does it feel too exaggerated? Well, I'm not sure. Let's go back. I'm going to go back to the 5th colour. 2% size, still only 30%, is it? Yes, thereabouts, 29. Close enough. And then we can just bring, like I say, a bit of that definition. Some of that to the peripheral areas. Not too much. Makes sense that it wouldn't be there too much. It does make sense that it would be impacting the clumps of snow up here, so maybe just add it a little bit. Perhaps we could even go to some of that brighter colour actually. Let's go for the 7th colour. Just to impact it in these areas a little bit as well. Fairly close to the window. We could even go for the 8th colour, why not? It's pretty close to those windows, it makes sense. If you've got the logic that it's impacting here so strongly, it makes sense that it would up there too. Can't resist adding this really bright colour. I'm going to put it way up there, almost at the 100%. Just feel like I need to make real sure it's super bright there. That works. 5th colour again. We don't want it that high. We want it back down to about 30%. And we're just approaching finishing touches now. 3% size. Bring back some of these textures. In fact, let's put it down 2%. And maybe there's just some clumps in here that continue to softly add in some of that reflected light. All through the center track area, we'll just add a bit more of this. Could even go backwards a colour. 3rd colour, still going to show through. 2% size, 30% strength, or close to it. Add some of this turbulence in here, it's all fine. It's all been kicked up, people walking through. Now what I do need to do is put it up, maybe 5% size, and maybe just soften in this area. Go over it a few times. I feel like it needs to be a little bit more smoothed out. That's okay to be churned up, but this needs to be a little bit softer. Same over at this side. Go over it a few times. You can even go in with something like the smudge. Put the smudge to the soft brush. Put it pretty big. Where are we? 10% size and 70% strength. And then you can even just mush that in a little bit. Just be careful though. Just helps create that softness. I feel that that's working pretty nicely. I'm going to go to layer 10, add the alpha lock on. I'm going to go in with the 4th colour. Still with the soft brush. 2% size. 40% strength now, and it is just way over the top. But I think to justify that light, so you need to ramp up some of the light in the cabin as well. We don't want it to look like it's an inferno out of control inside, but just ramped it up a bit more. I think it helps. We don't want to create an emergency situation. In fact, I feel that that has pushed it too far. So let's just step backwards a little bit. It's enough to convey the sense that there's light in there without pushing it too far. And then I'm going to go to the very top, new layer, go in with a dark colour. So maybe the 3rd colour, no, the 4th colour on the top row. I'm going to go in with the drawing evolve brush, 4% size, maybe 50% strength. And I feel like I just need to add a bit more variation of texture on the ground just to help blend in some of these different things. It would be a bit strange if there was just no texture back here whatsoever. Let's just soften it in a little bit. Bushes and other things. Blend it in with some of the stuff that we've already got. Make a bit more sense of it down here as well. What I might do as one finishing touch is go back to the sky. So layer 3 had the stars. We'll go create a layer above that. We'll go in with this pinky purple, so the 6th colour on the middle row, airbrushing, soft brush, 5% size, 30% strength, and we'll just have some cloud that's just cutting through here. It's got a nice warm hue to it. Go behind these trees, maybe turn it down, 3%, 2%, get some smaller variations in there, maybe even put it up again. 10%, 11%, and just hints of it up here as well. Just tap it in. And then going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. Go to another colour, maybe the 4th colour on the bottom row. 5% size, 30% strength. And at the top bit of that, just add a bit more shadow. So you imagine it's just picking up the warmth of the sun on the underside of it. The sun has just set, so the underside is still picking up a little bit of that warmth, but then maybe over here it's going to contrast with the sky quite nicely, and it's just going to be a little bit darker. I think that works. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I might push it a little bit further over at my Patreon. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I shall see you back here soon. Bye for now.